The morning sun over Coronado had not yet begun its fierce California blaze, casting the quiet island community in a soft, golden glow. For the residents of this picturesque peninsula across the bay from San Diego, the day began like any other. Military families walked their children to school. The rhythmic sound of helicopter rotors from the nearby Naval Air Station provided a constant, reassuring backdrop, and the smell of fresh coffee wafted from the small, unassuming storefront of Clayton's coffee shop. It was a local institution, a place where SEAL trainees, veterans, and townsfolk mingled without pretense, bonded by their love for the community and a decent cup of joe. Behind the counter, preparing for the morning rush, was Sarah Jenkins, a 17-year-old high school student. For Sarah, working the walk-up window at Clayton's was more than just a minimum wage job. It was her first real taste of responsibility. She had learned to steam milk to the perfect microfoam, memorized the regulars' orders, the usual hun, and took pride in the genuine connections formed over the counter. Her mother, Lynn, who managed the nearby High Tide bottle shop and kitchen, had taught her the value of hard work and treating everyone with kindness. Today, however, that kindness would be tested in a way she never expected. The COVID-19 pandemic had turned their world upside down. California Governor Gavin Newsom had issued a statewide mandate requiring face masks in public spaces to curb the spread of the virus. For the staff at Clayton's, this meant enforcing a policy that was often met with grumbles, rolled eyes, and occasional defiance. But they persisted, knowing it was for their safety and the safety of their customers. The virus didn't care about your reputation or your service record. It was an invisible enemy, and masks were the first line of defense. Sarah was used to the minor confrontations. She had developed a polite but firm script. "Good morning, welcome to Clayton's. For the safety of everyone, could you please pull your mask up over your nose and mouth?" Most people complied, some with a sigh of inconvenience, but some didn't. As the line grew, Sarah noticed a man approaching the walk-up window. He was stocky, with a close-cropped haircut and the unmistakable bearing of a military man. His face mask was dangling uselessly from one ear, a clear violation of the state order and the shop's policy. As he stepped up to the window to place his order, a male co-worker, just as young and inexperienced as Sarah, politely intervened. "Sir, I'm sorry, but could you please put your mask on before ordering?" The man stopped. He didn't pull up his mask. Instead, he fixed his gaze on the teenager, and what happened next would be captured on a cell phone and seared into the memory of everyone present. The man's demeanor shifted instantly from a customer to an accuser. "First of all, you're going to listen to me because I'm a customer and I've been coming here since 2009, he snarled, jabbing a finger aggressively toward the young barista. His voice, loud and dripping with entitlement, cut through the morning calm. He was no longer just a man without a mask. He was a force of intimidation, and exploiting his status to bulldoze over two teenagers just trying to do their jobs during a global pandemic. His threats escalated quickly, moving from personal grievance to professional retribution. "I will tell everyone at the teams never to come back here again, including the dudes in BUD/S, he warned, referencing the intense basic underwater demolition/SEAL training that took place just a stone's throw away at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. He punctuated his tirade by calling their customer service unsat, military jargon for unsatisfactory, and slammed his hand on the counter for emphasis. He was leveraging the very reputation of the Navy SEALs, an institution built on honor and humility, to threaten a teenager over a piece of cloth. Sarah stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel the eyes of other customers on her, a mix of sympathy and discomfort. The man, oblivious to the scene he was creating, continued his verbal assault. "The way that guy just talked to me. Not only that, he's uneducated on the policies of the state of California. What makes the law the law? He needs to do a little reading, maybe go back to school, he said, pointing at Sarah's co-worker, a high school student whose education had been disrupted by the pandemic, now being lectured on ignorance by a grown man throwing a tantrum. To add a final touch of absurdity to his outrage, he played the ultimate card of the entitled customer. "I'm not getting coffee here. I'm going over to Starbucks, which I can't stand," he threatened. That's as if abandoning his preferred coffee shop was the ultimate punishment for their insistence on public health guidelines. The situation was spiraling. The two teenagers at the window were speechless, unsure how to de-escalate a confrontation with a man who seemed to have no intention of backing down. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It was in that charged moment that a voice, calm and steady as a surgeon's hand, cut through the man's rant from somewhere behind him in the line. "Excuse me, can I get my order?" The interjection was a lifeline thrown into a storm. It was simple, polite, and utterly indifferent to the man's tantrum. It was the voice of someone who had seen real chaos, real danger, and was completely unimpressed by this petty display of ego. The man, however, was too deep in his performance to register the subtle shift in the atmosphere. He ignored the request and pressed on, determined to make his point to the terrified teenagers. But the woman who had spoken was not someone who was used to being ignored. She stepped forward from the line, moving with a fluid grace that hinted at years of physical discipline. She was of average height, with a lean, muscular build that was easy to miss under her casual weekend clothes. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that was unremarkable at first glance, but upon closer inspection, held eyes that were a startling shade of pale blue, the kind of eyes that had been trained to scan horizons for threats, to remain calm in the face of incoming fire. Her name was Ilara Stryker Vance, and for the past 12 years, and she had been one of the Navy's most lethal and effective weapons. Ilara had not always been Stryker. That call sign had been earned in the scorching deserts of Iraq during her second deployment. Her team had been ambushed, pinned down in a wadi by enemy fighters with superior positioning. While her teammates laid down suppressing fire, Ilara had done what seemed impossible. She had run, not for cover, but straight into the kill zone, using the terrain with an intimacy that suggested she had been born there. She had flanked the enemy position, neutralized 3 fighters with a precision that was almost surgical, and then dragged her wounded team leader to safety. It was an act of such audacious courage and skill that it had become whispered about in the teams. She was one of the few women to have successfully completed the brutal training and been accepted into the male-dominated world of naval special warfare, earning their respect through sheer, undeniable competence. She had served with SEAL Team 7, the very same unit the man at the window was trying to use as a threat. She had been there. She had done that. And she had the scars, both visible and invisible, to prove it. The man at the window, whose name was later revealed to be a sailor assigned to the Naval Special Warfare Command, was still ranting. He was so consumed by his own self-importance that he failed to notice the woman who had now stepped directly beside him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she spoke again, her words were laced with a quiet authority that silenced the air around them. "He asked you to put on a mask," she said, her voice even and controlled. "It's the law. Put it on or step out of line so the rest of us can get our coffee." The man whirled around, ready to unleash his fury on this new, unwanted participant. But when his eyes met hers, something stopped him cold. It wasn't just her gaze, though that was unnervingly direct. It was her posture. She wasn't cowering or bracing for an argument. She was standing in a relaxed, balanced stance, her weight evenly distributed, her hands loose at her sides but ready. It was the stance of someone who had spent countless hours in hand-to-hand combat training, someone who had been in more fights than most people could imagine and had won every single one. It was a stance he recognized from the kill house, from the mats, or from the eyes of the instructors who could break you without breaking a sweat. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he spat, trying to reassert his dominance, though his voice had lost some of its bluster. Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't blink. In the space of a heartbeat, she assessed him. The way he held his hands, the slight forward lean of his torso, the lack of situational awareness he had just displayed by ignoring the line behind him. He was either a very new operator, fresh out of training and full of ego, or, more likely, he was support personnel attached to the command, someone who wore the uniform but had never truly been forged in the fire. Either way, he was making a scene that disrespected the community he claimed to represent. "My name is Ilara Vance," she said, her voice low enough that only he and the wide-eyed teenagers could hear. "And I spent 12 years on the teams, 6 of them with 7. I've bled with men who would be ashamed to see one of their own acting like this. You're not a threat to these kids. You're an embarrassment." The color drained from his face. SEAL Team 7. The connection was immediate and damning. She wasn't just some random civilian with an opinion. She was a direct link to the very institution he was trying to weaponize. In the tight-knit world of the naval special warfare community, reputation was everything. And in that moment, he knew he had just destroyed his in front of a verified, combat-tested operator. The mention of 7 wasn't just a unit designation. It was a reference to the same SEAL Team 7 that had recently been in the news for all the wrong reasons. A team plagued by scandal and a loss of leadership. Her implication was clear. They were trying to rebuild their honor, and his behavior was a step in the wrong direction. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The fight had completely drained out of him. The knife hand he had been so proudly wielding moments before now hung limply at his side. He looked from Ilara's unyielding face to the terrified teenagers behind the window, to the line of customers who were now staring at him with undisguised contempt. The weight of his absurdity crashed down on him. He had threatened to ruin a local business over a face mask, and he had been dressed down by a woman who had likely faced down enemies far more dangerous than a disgruntled barista. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his mask still dangling from his ear, see his tail between his legs. He didn't go to Starbucks. He simply disappeared into the California morning, a cautionary tale in the making. The line of customers, which had been frozen in stunned silence, erupted in a quiet wave of relieved murmurs. Sarah, still shaking, looked at the woman who had just rescued them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't know what to do." Ilara offered a small, genuine smile, the first crack in her stoic facade. "You did fine, kid. You were just doing your job. That's nothing to be ashamed of." She ordered a simple black coffee, paid in cash, and stepped away from the window, melting back into the fabric of the town as if she had never intervened. But her actions had a ripple effect that extended far beyond that single confrontation. Another customer, who had been recording the entire incident on their phone, uploaded the video to Reddit under the now iconic title, "NavySEAL Karen Loses It at Restaurant Worker." The internet, as it always does, did its thing. The video went viral, sparking a firestorm of debate about military entitlement, mask mandates, and public decency. The sailor was quickly identified by the Navy, and the incident was confirmed to be under investigation by the Naval Special Warfare Command. The story, however, took on a second life. Local news outlets picked it up, and the focus shifted from the sailor's outburst to the quiet heroism of the woman who had stopped it. The Navy Times, Newsweek, and Military.com all ran the story, but the narrative had a new, powerful angle. It wasn't just a story about a sailor behaving badly. It was a story about a community protecting its own, about a veteran using her hard-earned skills not for combat, but for de-escalation. The comment sections were flooded with support for the baristas and praise for the unknown woman's courage. For Ilara, the incident remained a private moment. She didn't seek fame or recognition. She had spent her life in the shadows, operating in the gray areas where results mattered more than credit. She had seen the worst of humanity, and she had also seen the best. The confrontation at the coffee shop was, to her, just another mission. Assess the threat, protect the innocent, and neutralize the situation with the minimum force necessary. She had simply applied her training, but for Sarah and her family, Ilara was a guardian angel. Lynn Papakonstantinou, Sarah's mother, they later spoke to the press about the incident, expressing her disgust at the sailor's behavior and her profound gratitude for the stranger who had stood up for her daughter. She called the man's actions a terrible demonstration of the way some people behave and bully the folks that are most vulnerable. Her words resonated with parents everywhere who feared for their children working public-facing jobs during a time of heightened tension and pandemic stress. The owner of Clayton's, Mary Freeze, addressed the incident in a somber Facebook post, stating, "The continuous resistance to wearing masks has been disheartening. We respectfully ask all of our guests to comply with California's orders to wear masks when at our establishment." The post was a quiet plea for civility in a world that seemed to be losing it. The incident became a symbol of the everyday battles faced by essential workers, the frontline soldiers in a war against a virus who were forced to endure abuse simply for asking people to follow the rules. The sailor's fate was sealed by his own arrogance. The Navy spokesman, Lieutenant Matthew Stroup, made the service's position clear. "We require humility and professionalism from all Naval Special Warfare Service members. We value our long-standing relationship with the local community and will continue to foster a positive relationship in the future." The message was unambiguous. The behavior displayed in that video was the antithesis of everything the Naval Special Warfare community was supposed to stand for. The investigation would run its course and appropriate action would be taken, but the damage to his reputation was already done. Weeks turned into months, and the immediate furor died down. The video was archived. The news articles became footnotes in the broader story of the pandemic. But in Coronado, the legend of the woman in the coffee shop grew. People would speculate in hushed tones. Who was she? Was she really a SEAL? How had she learned to disarm a raging man with just a few words? Ilara, for her part, went back to her quiet life. She was used to the whispers. She had spent her entire career being underestimated, her abilities questioned because of her gender. She had learned to let her actions speak for her. The coffee shop incident was just another action. She had seen a wrong, assessed the risk, and righted it. It was as simple as that. One cool autumn evening, Ilara found herself back at Clayton's. The world had changed. Masks were now a familiar, if unwelcome, sight. Sarah was working the window again. When she saw Ilara approach, her face broke into a wide, genuine smile. She didn't say anything about that day. She didn't need to. She simply prepared Ilara's usual, a black coffee, and handed it to her with a quiet, "On the house." Ilara looked at the young woman, seeing the resilience in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She had faced a bully and come out the other side, stronger for it. She took the coffee and nodded, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. It was a gesture of mutual respect, a bridge between generations, between a teenager finding her voice and a warrior who had spent her life defending the voiceless. Ilara walked away from the window, the warm cup in her hand a stark contrast to the cool evening air. She thought about her teammates, and the ones she had lost and the ones she had saved. She thought about the complex morality of her former life, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. And she thought about that morning, 15 seconds of confrontation that, in their own way, were just as important as any firefight she had ever been in. It wasn't about taking down an enemy. It was about standing up for what was right, protecting the innocent, and reminding a fellow service member of the true meaning of honor. It was a small victory, but in the long, quiet battle for civility and respect, it was a victory nonetheless. And for a woman like Alara Stryker Vance, that was more than enough.